Good morning. Are we going? All right. You put it on YouTube. So I tried to download it off YouTube. Instead, downloaded a virus to my computer. And then I couldn't come to Shiur for 2 weeks. So I put a mask on my computer. We're all good. Okay, good morning. Menorahs are found on the Bima. Today, we are going to discuss electric menorahs. It's an interesting topic. I think partially because it's one of those topics where the modern world seems to have invented something that should usurp to some extent what was always done, and yet we don't do it. We don't utilize the electric menorah. I'll wait one more minute. I jumped the gun there. Offsides. Right? You'd assume the idea of the menorah is you're lighting something in order to let the world know, pursuing Nisa, that a nace happened, and yet once you're no longer using olive oil, so l'chora, anything you're doing that makes it look like you have a candelabra lit should work. And why not use a light bulb? Especially us New Jerseyans who like light bulbs because it was invented here. So it's interesting to go through the sources to find what exactly are the objections to an electric menorah, why do you not use it, and what happens if you find yourself in a place where you cannot access a real menorah, or you're in a hotel, a plane, a hospital, where you're not able to light with a candle. The first source is this beautiful chart I found online. I think it came from HomeDepot.com. You may know more about light bulbs than myself, but if you decided to ever compare, and you wanted to put into your house one of these four options for lighting, so you could take this home and store it, and you'll know. But essentially, there are four different ways to light your house. One is candlelight, not recommended. One is the incandescent light bulb, that we're all familiar with. What's unique about the incandescent light bulb is that there's a wire filament that gets heated up till it's red hot. And that's going to be very crucial, because if you look in the second source, the Rambam says, on Shabbos, if you take a piece of metal and you heat it till it gets red hot, that is considered havara, as in lighting a fire. Don't just think of lighting a fire in the classical sense of the fire when you strike a match, but also a piece of metal that's red hot is equivalent to lighting a fire. Therefore, an incandescent light bulb essentially, although it may be encased in glass and it may be a red hot filament, essentially it's no different, seemingly, than a candlelight. Yes?
Yeah.
And when these things first came out, there was a big discussion: can you use them for Neighbor Shabbos? Can you use them for Havdalah? Or perhaps you could use them on Shabbos because they're not really lighting a fire. And there were some poskim, I believe Rav Chaim Moser among them, who dafka specifically used a light bulb for Havdalah because he wanted to show everyone, don't think this is just some random device that lights up, but it's actually a fire. And you cannot turn it on and off on Shabbos. The next is the CFL. The CFL is basically a fancy halogen light. How exactly it works, you got to go Wikipedia, and maybe you'll understand better than myself. And then the LED also, it's LED is also, again, you can go Wikipedia. I put down there, I don't totally understand it, but the difference between the latter two and the first one is there is no red hot filament, but rather it's using some sort of chemicals and gases in order to produce light. Good? Did I get it all right? Are you the engineer here? So you next time I'll have you explain
it's fine. Go on. Yeah.
You can explain. What do you say?
What about gasoline?
What, you want to explain it to us, the difference?
What a light emitting diode is?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, okay. I mean, yeah, if you take material, and you pass a current through them, and you excite the electrons, they raise to another power level, and when they decrease, they emit energy, right? Because, they conservation of energy, and so as a byproduct, they send out
light.
Light, yeah. So that's how that works. And similarly with the gas, CFL, you have these fluorescents, and they get excited, and when they get unexcited, they emit light.
Got it. Okay, fine. So, I was hoping someone's an engineer. I couldn't remember if you were an engineer because I knew you did computers. I want to tell the person who paid for that engineering degree. But, okay, but the point is, what did he say?
We need the guy who's going for a PhD.
Yes, exactly. Essentially, the difference between the two is going to be, or the three are, one has this red hot strip, this filament, and the other two do not. And Daniel will explain why. I still do not understand. I'm sorry. But enough to understand what was going on. Okay, fine. So that being the case, we are only now going to discuss the incandescent light bulb because that's most similar to a candle. Can you or can you not use it for your Hanukkah? On Hanukkah, this is the question that the Yechavadas, Rabbi Yosef, was asked. If you remember Rabbi Yosef and Yechavadas, we discussed these were actually radio addresses. Someone would ask a question, he'd just answer on the spot, and they'd write it up afterwards, and you could see the man knew a lot of Torah because he did his all by heart. So look at source number 1, question 1. Two questions, really one following the other. Can you use an electric light? And two is, in the basic Knesset, seemingly there may be some sort of different chiyuv, maybe not, and can you use one there? Turn the page. Tshuva. B'Masechta Shabbos Amru, Shmeinim Upsilim, She'amru Chachamim Ein Madlikim Behem B'Shabbos. Mepnei She'enim Marim Yafeh, Madlikim B'Chanukah. There's a rule that when you light the Shabbos candles, you can only use lights which produce only use material which produce a nice light. However, on Hanukkah we don't have the same requirement, and therefore there are certain things that are allowed on Hanukkah, not allowed on Shabbos. As the Rambam says, "Kol shmeinu psilim gesherim le'er Hanukkah, aval pi she'ena shmeinim nimshachim achar psila ve'ena ar nisala yaf b'ofen ozna psila." Chaim Pasuk Torah v'Shulchan Aruch ulechora nira says the Rabbi Yosef. Once we waive the requirement and say there's no requirement for a specific type of psila, specific type of wick, and a specific sort of oil, the way there is by Shabbos, so l'chora anything should go, and you should use a Chanukah chashmalit as well. U'efrachi mara yafa. It's even a nicer light. It's brighter. It could be whiter. It lasts longer. V'yesh bo hider l'mitzvah ner Chanukah. Right? We all like hider mitzvah. What's better than having an electric light in the window? It's going to last longer. It's brighter. You go to Home Depot now, you can get 4 different types of light bulbs. Somehow, every time I go, I know there's the daylight, there's sunlight, there's dark room, and I always end up with different ones. My house looks like a little bit like a merry-go-round. I don't know, but you can get those. V'chein Pasko Harav Hagon Rabbi Yosef Mishash B'Shut Mayim Chaim. Rabbi Yosef Mishash, in fact, Paskins, one can use an electric light on Shabbos. I believe I looked it up once. He even goes so far as to say, not Shabbos, on Hanukkah, you should use one because it's Mara Yafeh. It looks nicer. Hider mitzvah. However, here's the first objection. This comes from Yitzchak Shmelkes. Yitzchak Shmelkes in the base Yitzchak, one of the preeminent poskim in Europe. She'ein yotzin yedei chovas ner Hanukkah lo begaz v'lo b'chashmali. Why not? Right? You'd say it's brighter. It looks nicer. In fact, the Gemara in Shabbos says you can use any light for the Hanukkah. But what's considered a light? So before he even gets there, he goes, no. What's the mitzvah min a the ultimate and best way to fulfill the obligation of Hanukkah is with Shemen Zayis, the way it was in the temple. If that's true, how can you use an electric light? Good? We like that? Any questions? Yes?
Some people use candles, that's not oil, so it would seem that with just that, it would seem that an electric light would be better than a candle.
Exactly. You're saying that we all use candles, and although there is a Maharalmi product that says it's usher to use wax, and his son records he made a cherim on those who use wax. He banned using wax. We're using wax. So once we're using wax, we should really be using anything and use the hider mitzvah, the nicest light.
Couldn't you though argue that the hider mitzvah is the oil because it is remembering the menorah in the temple specifically?
That's for sure. No, that is the hider
then
mitzvah.
you can argue that okay, so electric light would be permissible, but the oil would still be preferred.
100%. The problem is Rav Yitzchak Shmelka's objection why it's usher to use electric light is because you're not using the hider mitzvah of of oil. But the problem is it's a hider. Exactly. Which he's going to bring up. But before that, there's a second objection. And this is going to be a different, okay. Because you use light bulbs you use electric lights all year. Look up right now. We have electric lights. Ain't behem mishum parsumi nisa. There's no parsumi nisa. A person walks by the house and sees a electric light on. Oh, maybe it's the bathroom light he left on. Maybe it's the closet light left on. Maybe it's a menorah. There's no parsumi nisa. No one's walking by and go, oh, Hanukkah, or remembering how we were saved, and there was one little flask of oil, and we learned this week you didn't really need it, but like we have it, etc. No one's saying that. There's no pursuing Nisa because everyone's using electric lights. Because every car has a light bulb on it. Became as the Ramah points out, you don't put your Hanukkah candles next to your Shabbos candles, for instance, because it all looks the same. Give me 1 second. And therefore one cannot make the bracha on the gas and chashmali. Yes?
That argument seems wrong. If you walk by my house and my shades are closed and you see there's a light on in the room, yeah, you don't know if I left my light on or whatever, but the same thing would apply if I light with olive oil. If you just see light passing through window shades, you're not going to know what was lit. But if it's in the window, in which case there's no difference if it's oil or gas or electric or LED or whatever. But if it's in the window and you see individual little lights at exactly a certain amount and that shape and all that stuff, of course you know what it is. It doesn't matter what the handle is made out of. You're going to recognize the shape and the symbology of it.
And even more so, if it looks like a menorah, you know it's a menorah.
Right.
So as we'd say in yeshiva, you're saying that you can say better.
Also,
Well, also in July, it's not gonna be
started, it was all lamp oil or whatever. So what's the difference between one lamp oil or another lamp oil, if that's what you're arguing?
So I think that's a stronger time. I mean, it's playing off what Eitan and what's your name?
Scott.
And Scott are saying, and that is 300 years ago, everyone was using olive oil. So like the whole
Well, hey, July it's not Hanukkah either. So if you see lights, you're not going to think it's Hanukkah.
I think it's for
Because
the
you see lights.
fireworks on 4th of July.
But that's not Hanukkah.
No, it's not Hanukkah. All right. So let's see what Ravavadi responds to Yitzchak Shmelkes, who again was a major posek. Ulam ein devarim muchrachim. What does that mean? Ein devar muchrachim. These words are not. They don't go here.
They're not.
Sha'af al pisha shemen zayis mitzvah min muchar. First, right, the first kind of was the mitzvah min muchar, the hiddur mitzvah. You use olive oil. Why would you go and now resort to using electric lights? Mikol makam hari kol hashmenim kasher ner Chanukah. What was the source? All lights are kosher for ner Chanukah. So enachanami, many times in life, just the mitzvah min muchar. There's lichat chila, and this is even different. It's not even lichat chila and b'diavad. It's lichat chila and hiddur. So you're going to tell me, we're going to make a halacha prohibiting using electric lights, a light bulb, because there's a hiddur mitzvah to use in their shemen zayis? Doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Even despite what we said this week in the drasha about how Hanukkah is about being aspirational and ambitious in our spiritual lives, but still, we're not going to ask for something. So he says, and then he says, Vav gas v'chashmali ke'echad mehem. Certainly, gas and electric should be one of the many ways in which you can create light. Good. He quotes a very similar idea from Gemara Harius. Again, just because you can't fulfill something in the optimal way doesn't mean we don't fulfill it. Knocks down the first objection. His second response is as follows. The Gama Tamasheni, this is essentially maybe Yair snuck into his study and wrote this. Ein muchrach klal. Sharei bizman avusenu avusenu. Shekol Tashmisham la'ar ner shemen. Our fathers and grandfathers, everything they did was by the candle light. And they also fulfilled the obligation of Hanukkah with olive oil. Essentially, Yair's point. They were lighting their candles so they can read, and they were lighting their Hanukkah candle. If you're going to tell me I can't use a light bulb because I have other light bulbs in my house, well, what did they do 200 years ago? You can't use a candle because they had other candles in the house? It doesn't work, says the Chacham Abadi. And therefore, he essentially says, with all due respect to Yitzchak Shmelkes, I don't agree with your logic, and based off that, it should be permissible to use electric lights. However, not so fast. Question?
No.
All right, just
Wait,
stretch it.
wait.
All right. My watch tells me sometimes I got to get up every long. Okay. Ula. Emes Nisna Le'amir. He raises a third objection, right? We had two objections from the Yitzchak Shmelkas, the Beis Yitzchak. We had the response of Chacham Avadia, and now Chacham Avadia raises his own. Sheyesh tam nochon lomar she'en yotzim dechovas mitzvahs halakas ner Chanukah v'Chanukah chashmalit. This is in source 6. I have the correct reason why one should not use an electric light, and it's as follows: Hu mipnei she'en b'Chanukah chashmalit lo shemen v'lo psila. In a Chanukah electric light, there's no wick, there's no oil. V'hanesh shezrachesh b'neiros beis hamikdash shu b'shemen shlo yabo lahadik elo yom echad v'nas b'neiz lahadik shmona yomim. V'mitzvah v'halakas ner b'chanukah kadei lahaskas neish shezrash kvar. Says as follows: What are we doing on Chanukah? What are we commemorating? The nace that took place in the temple, the miracle in the temple, where there was a menorah that was lit that lasted for 8 days. So if we're going to memorialize that, we have to use a menorah that's very similar. It has to have a wick. It has to have oil or some sort of something similar to oil, like shem, like a wax that essentially mimics what took place in the temple. Maybe you could argue that would be essentially saying, "Oh, on Pesach, I'm gonna eat. I don't know. I'll eat bread because they walked out with matzah." Doesn't work. We have to memorialize things the way in which it took place. Yes.
That's the only way we're going to memorialize it. I mean, they use specific types of wicks that we know of, so we know they use those wicks. They use specific grades of olive oil.
So here's the question.
They had 6. They had 7 rather. We had 8.
I think the question, and I think I've asked this often enough in almost every shiur. Where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line and say this is no longer a menorah, and where can you say, no, we all know this is a menorah just like it was in the temple. It's just, okay, we're not going to build the exact same way. In fact, there may be a prohibition to build it the exact same way. Where do you draw the line? Do you see saying that now we're mimicking it, and now we've already diluted it so much that it's no longer a menorah?
So fine, so I'll use electric, but I'll only have 6 branches on mine, 7 branches on mine, and now it'll be in a different way, more like the one in the Beit HaMikdash.
So that clearly the poskim didn't think that was enough. Chacham Avadia is saying you have to have a menorah. What is the definition of menorah? It has, and elsewhere I believe it says a base kibble, a place to hold a wick. It has to have a wick, and it has to have some sort of shemen of some sort of something that actually gets lit. That's there, and it can run. Also, it can run out. That all those sort of things, and that's a menorah. Just because something looks like a menorah doesn't make it a menorah because there's no wick. There's no, it's you unplug it. The second you unplug it, it goes out. There's no base kibble, perhaps.
You could say there's a wick because the filament actually does burn out.
So I was thinking that also, but then you can. Yeah, I was thinking that also.
So, but there's no argument against the oil, though.
There's no argument about the oil, right? Let's just finish this piece. We can fine. If you la'as l'shtamesh b'neres Chanukah, I feel b'tashmish al mitzvah kamo b'neres beis hamikdash. So that's essentially his time, and he thinks it's very strong. Charles, you have a point. You want to?
What about the way it's lit? You can't do another
Yeah, but that's I don't know if that would be ma'akiv. I don't know if that would be ma'akiv. I don't know if that would be the so that define it. But I think what we are going to say is how far, and Chacham Avadia is basically saying is how far do you go before you say this is no longer a menorah? Okay, so it has 8 branches, but you're not lighting it. Maybe again you can't light it. Maybe that's the idea. There's no psila. You can't light it. There's no place to hold the wick. I think there's merit to that. You don't like it? We'll see some other ideas. Turn the page. Before we turn the page, he just addressed one question we can say is outside, and that's as follows. If you say the idea is mimicking the Beis HaMikdash, and it needs to have a base kibble and all that, what do you do about the public lightings that take place in the city, center of the city, or electric lights? So if you see on top of a picture of a man standing on top of the Beis Medrash in Kerem B'Yavneh. So I live in Kerem B'Yavneh. I spend a lot of time looking at that menorah or walking beneath it. Is there any merit to doing that if it's not, again, a public menorah that has no psila, it's electric light? So he basically says that, there is a Pesumei Nisa, but it's not in mitzvah, and therefore after you light your menorah, you can go on the top of your shul and do your electric menorah. But in and of itself, it's not an actual real kiyum. No bracha. No bracha. And he concludes as well, you do not make a bracha so much so that if you were to, let's say, be somewhere, and you're like, you know what, you're stuck, you're in a hospital, and you light an electric menorah, you don't make a bracha, when you were to come out and you get a real menorah, you light with a bracha. that it's really, I mean, you could have made the argument, it's a suffix, maybe you are, maybe you're not. So now that maybe you've suffix, Yotzei, you discharge your obligation, so you shouldn't light with him a bracha afterwards. He said, no, you've done pretty much nothing. Next source is Rav Kook. We're on the last page. Rav Kook, he basically says, and he makes the argument, how are we doing time-wise? Rav Kook basically makes the argument, and he says as follows. This new invention of gas and electric in our days, even though it's brighter, it's a nicer flame. This is an interesting time. This is more technical. I'm wondering, some people in this room, I don't know if they're, when I saw it, I was wondering if they're going to like it or they're not going to like it. And essentially as follows. Chazal made the takana when they made this takana. They didn't have electric lights back then. So they didn't include it in the takana of what's considered a ner for Hanukkah. They said, what we have in front of us, this is a ner. Barring that, we're not, just because you come up with a new way to light things 2,000 years later, that's just not what the mitzvah of Hanukkah was established on. So it's kind of like it's out for a technical reason. It's out because it just wasn't part of the original takana.
So I can drive a car to shul on Shabbos because the Torah doesn't say anywhere I can't drive a car. It's
No.
not listed as one of the things it's ushered, so I can do it.
No, first of all, this is in the positive way. In the positive way. That how do you fulfill your obligation on Hanukkah? What's considered a light? Chazal was sitting there, they were like, okay, that's a light, that's a light, that's a light. Even though on Shabbos it's not considered the optimal way for lighting. I mean, they're not saying it's not a fire. They're just saying it's not considered a light that you get the mitzvah of Neres Hanukkah. 2,000 years later, we come up with a new way to make a light. Rav Kook's saying, well, they just didn't say that's also a way to do it.
It sounds like a bad argument.
Why can't you use a lemon for I mean, it's a bad example, but in a way you can analogous. But why can you not use it? Because the Torah says that's not pre Netzada.
Right, but the Torah says that that's not pre Netzada, it existed.
Okay.
Saying, they didn't have Ruach HaKodesh to know that one day this new technology was going to exist, so they didn't usher the new technology.
No, it's the opposite. It's not they never Ruach HaKodesh. It's precisely the opposite point. It's precisely the opposite point. They said, we are being koveya right now, the 2 or 3 or 4 things that you can do to fulfill your mitzvah with, everything else is out.
But they didn't do that.
Well, that's where Rav Kook's saying they did do that. Rav Kook's saying they did do that. They sat down and said, this is how you do it. And after that, maybe you can make the same argument as well with the Megillah. Chazal decided writing Megillah, they say we're patterning it after, almost like the Sefer Torah, a couple other differences with Sir to whatnot. But now we have a printing press, so now we have a printer, so maybe a Megillah should be done on a printer. No, Chazal said it has to be done like in Igeris, and this is the way it's done, and we're used to that all the time. Chazal make takanas, and some things are in, some things are out for whatever reason it may be. It's not about, I'm not even going on the Ruach HaKodesh, they knew one day there'd be a light. It's not about that. They just decided these are the couple of things that work, everything else doesn't work.
But that argument, problem is that they decided what works for them and what doesn't based on what existed and what they knew existed.
Okay.
Had they known about electric levels, they may have said yes, and therefore they didn't.
That's not an argument or a line of reasoning that we can go down.
They didn't think of it as bad.
And had the Torah we're not going to go there.
They didn't think of it as a bad argument.
And also, we don't know the reasons for Chazal. We don't know the reasons for Chazal. Maybe they would have ushered it for 3 other reasons.
The rules have parameters. When a new thing exists, it should be in or out based on the parameters of.
And Rav Kook's saying it's out because they decided what Yod's saying. Okay, what do you think about this, Daniel?
Either way. It seems something like. This is a low effort kind of situation, so it's kind of like not worth picking your battles here. It's not like second day Yom Tov. It's like, okay, oil's pretty available, you light with a wick, like fine. You move on with your life. It's not like, the stakes are pretty low.
I think Rav Kook's, Rabbi Yosef's answer is the best because, the miracle was based on Shemen, so we should continue with Shemen. His argument about the wicks, though, I disagree with because you do have a wick. It's the filament, and you do have a wick holder, what holds the filament, and you light it by turning the switch.
So it happens to
but,
be.
But I agree with the oil.
It happens to be.
I think he has
and a tactical, once you start getting into it, one can make an argument that the filament's just fire, with no wick.
No, but it burns out.
but it's a fire without wick,
Might
whereas a
take a few
wick is
months.
fire on a wick. But that's getting technical.
Never.
The problem is that the munter doesn't. The munter starts with these are the things that you're not allowed to light on Shabbos, and so it's a very specific set that you're not allowed to light with. The implication in Menorah Shabbos is that you're allowed to light with anything else as long as it's nice.
That's a fair point, especially.
So,
yeah.
which is further proven by the modern poskim that say that an incandescent light is completely permissible and even required, and even required for Havdalah, as you mentioned earlier.
Right.
So if the Gemara then goes on to say, well, all those things that are not permitted on Shabbos are now permitted for Ner Hanukkah, that doesn't invalidate anything else. It's a specific set that was already set down earlier in Shabbos. It's not don't use anything else or just use these things. The Gemara Hanukkah doesn't say just use these.
It's a very fair point because
the wording.
Rav Kook is not saying this is not. Or Rav Adi is saying, oh, this is not really a light. You can argue it's not. It doesn't pattern the base of Mikdash. Rav Kook is admitting, oh, this is a mamish a light. It's just the Chazal never goes around it because it didn't exist. That's a very fair point. Once you admit it's a light, then you kind of run into the category. Once it's a light, so it's in that category of things not allowed on Shabbos. Yeah.
So the question is, what did the Chachamim say? Did they actually say don't use anything
We don't know.
else?
So I think like with other things like sukkah, you have skaf, and you're like, okay, skaf has like what is skaf, right? And it goes through like what it is. It's like the karka, like like it has all these like parameters. As you were saying, here like there was nothing like specified in that like what it is. So you can debate what is light or like the menorah, but it seems to be like they didn't set up these rules and you need to fit in these rules. They said do a thing and you have to do the thing. And that's why I think Rav Kook is kind of making that distinction. It's like they said do a thing, do the thing as they said to do it. Not like here are rules and do something that is valid in that rule set.
I mean, we have Memelikin, right? We say it every week, or we should say it every week.
Correct.
So if we went into that, we
but
could.
That's something. That's something totally different. Like Nero's Hanukkah is not.
Well, that we compare the two, and then we kind of say Nero's Hanukkah.
Yeah, they're not. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Charles, you have something to say?
No, I just think that our tradition, I know this is not anything that these authorities are saying, so I'm not advancing. But our tradition is how you do things, right? That's every little how you hold this, you turn it, you do this. And
Tradition is not.
Don't do it that way. And here, you're just talking about flipping a switch.
Yeah.
So it's not a learning exercise for the children because there's no ritual to it.
So-
You just put a switch.
So I want to go back to what we talked about the first year. Do you remember the first year we talked about what if a printing press gives kedusha, gives sanctity to the written word that you put down, and we concluded with the Maratz Chias, who essentially said history is unfolding. The way there's almost an evolution to the way in which things progress, and each generation it's up to the Chazal and the Chacham of that generation to basically re-look at the new inventions and how they interact with our tradition. And yes, we do incorporate what is new into the tradition. So I hear your point, but again, it's still in a funny place. But let's move on just because we're getting close to the end. So basically that is his taina. Fine. And he has, fine. Lastly, so we saw Chavadia says no, Rav Kook says no. Comes the Halicha Shlomo, which is a work written based on Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he says as follows. This is just a halachic work. Menorah chashmal. Kishnikar shehu l'shem ner Chanukah. One, when it's clearly apparent it's l'shem ner Chanukah, which Eitan will say very well. You look in the window, you see it. Eight stick candelabra with lights. Yesh sadin lahasbik im kasher l'mitzvaso. There are one can declare, one can say, perhaps one can be yotzei a mitzvah with this. Avamish ein lo breira acheres. If you are stuck, you are somewhere where there is no option. You were on a plane and you have no one in your house to light for you. You're in a hospital or perhaps a hotel. Rashai lahadlik paneshel menorah libon alvar chalaf. You can light and make a bracha on it. As long as it will stay lit for a half hour. Meaning, if it's a candle that it's battery operated, the battery will not last a half hour. You cannot use it. But Rav Shlomo Zalman says, if you are stuck and you have an incandescent light, then you can light it with a bracha. And he goes on at length to explain why, which we're not going to get into. I think Psak Halacha should be based off Chacham Avadia and Rav Kook, that we can take the Halicha Shlomo of Shlomo Zalman and we can light, but it's probably best not to light with a bracha. So light without a bracha. Best to light without a bracha because there's so many posts who say it's a problem. And Rav Willig said, just don't light altogether. Why are you lighting? That's what the conservatives do. I don't know why you even get into it. But Psak Halacha, I think based on everything we see, Rav Chacham Avadia says don't do it. Rav Yitzchak Shmelka says don't do it. Rav Kook says don't do it. Rav Shlomo Zalman says you're stuck. You could do it with a bracha. I think better to do it. Well, don't use it with a bracha. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify. With Rav Kook, do the Chachamim say do it this way and don't do it any other way?
No.
Okay, so I don't like Rav Kook. I mean, it's not that I don't like him.
A lot of our neighbors here don't. Oh, sorry.
No, I mean, you know what I mean.
Yes.